We all dream, every night, 4 or 5 times. Our dreams fascinate and intrigue us, but most of them are forgotten. And the few we do remember seem strange and confusing.
Welcome to the Way of the Dream. I'm sure that you have a special interest in dreams. A special interest perhaps in Carl Jung's and Marie-Louise von Franz's understanding of dreams. And if that is so, we are setting off on a journey that you will never forget. We are going to move into a realm that I have known for many, many years. Watching these episodes, I find myself repeatedly thinking, that's it. I got it. I finally got what that dream is about. Some light is shining deep into some dark corner of my unconscious. And after 20 years, I am ready to hear it. Body, mind, and soul. That is the experience that you are going to find as you listen. Where you are in your journey will determine what is challenging you most. Some people think that dreams are a pile of images, bizarre images. Other people find the images numinous, divinely enshrouded. They want to put them into music, or poetry, or dance. And others spend a half an hour a day with their dream journal, trying to understand what the unconscious is telling them about consciousness. They may believe that there is a spiritual guide in the dreams, because the dreams are the language of the soul. The symbol is carrying a spiritual message in the sensual imagery. If we believe that, then the dream becomes the water of life, which is what Jung called it. Without that nurturing, we are in a desert without water. We are like T.S. Eliot's people in the wasteland, headpieces stuffed with straw. The unconscious unable to contact consciousness. And now, we're ready to head for dreamland.
I very much regret to say that I hardly ever have any dreams.
Could you tell us a dream?
I honestly don't remember any.
I don't dream. Never. No. If I do, I don't remember them anyway.
There's no such thing.
No such thing.
No.
Couldn't tell you much about dreams. They're a mystery to me.
Oh no, I can't tell anybody. I get in trouble and leak out.
No, isn't that funny? Because I've just been reading about the times there, but what a load of rubbish. The funny things they say about you having dreams.
I'll usually forget them.
I don't go to bed every night thinking, oh, am I going to have a dream tonight? Goody.
Well, actually, I haven't had a good one in years.
Dreams? I don't dream that.
You dream about a broad, I better get a wet dream. I don't dream. Yes, that's the thing.
My dreams?
Oh my God.
They are important. Yes, I think so.
Why are they important?
I think, you know, sometimes you think about the different things during the day, and so I think it doesn't come out. So it's very good when it does come out during night.
From my experience, sometimes dreams can be just a result of having had too much for dinner.
Well, there must be some reason for them. I don't know what they do. I have dreams every night. I dream every night, but I don't know what, I can't associate any significance with them.
Sometimes remember frightening ones when you're being chased or something like that. I used to have nightmares when I was small, but not anymore.
I mean, they're just sort of, I don't know, visions.
Sometimes when I'm very ill, I get peculiarly baroque dreams. or sort of gothic horror stories. They're normally quite frightening, but after a while I got so used to them, they don't worry me anymore.
I guess the dreams that stand out the most in my mind are the bad dreams.
No, I don't have any.
You think they're important?
No, I don't think so, no.
Thank you.
Well, I thought about them, I read a lot about them. I consider they're just arbitrary. They have absolutely no meaning. They're just caused by things that have occurred to you in the past few weeks from your distant past.
Well, I guess I'm getting past dreams.
They're amusing to think of, but I wouldn't place any great significance on them.
I don't know anybody that's figured out what exactly they might mean, but they probably mean something.
Do you think they're important?
I don't know. It said they are, but whether they are or not, I wouldn't like to say.
Do you remember any?
Can't say I do offhand.
You guys got to be crazy. Why would anybody be doing a documentary on dreams?
I can't associate any significance with them.
I certainly do, like everyone does, but I do not remember my dreams.
Not often. Not often.
I very much
forget them in the morning.
I hardly ever have them.
I don't believe that it's important for my life what I'm dreaming in the night. I don't believe that
I've even dreamt I was
important.
dancing with Humphrey Bogart when he hadn't got a stitch on. How about that?
Dr. Marie-Louise von Franz is an analytical psychologist who worked directly with C.G. Jung for over 30 years. Here in this consulting room, people from all over the world have brought her dreams to be analyzed. And for the series, we film people telling their dreams. And Dr. von Franz will interpret these dreams in relation to the lives of the individual dreamers. Dr. von Franz, how long have you been studying dreams?
Well, I think about now 30 years approximately. I have figured out that I have interpreted approximately something like 65,000 dreams. That's a minimum.
And probably you've asked yourself a question that's often puzzled me. When I go to sleep, I enter a void. I don't exist. And when I dream, some power takes me over and makes me undergo some experience that I don't initiate myself. What's the power? Who makes up the dreams?
That is the most mysterious thing of all. Who makes the dreams? There is still a naive prejudice among many people that dreams are express our own wishes or our own schemes or plots. But the longer one looks at them, the more one sees that cannot be true. Too many dreams represent what we hate hearing.
I have nightmares, not dreams, nightmares. One time I jumped out of bed about 2 feet. I landed on my butt on the floor.
I always had this one recurring dream when I was little.
Tell us.
Yeah, it's a dream that I get rolled up in a window shade and my head's sticking out one end. It's not funny, my feet are at the other end and it's falling and falling and falling. And I can't scream, I have no voice. And right as I almost hit the floor, I wake up.
The basis from which dreams originate seem to be rather, let's call it with a vague expression, nature. Nature itself. It's a natural phenomenon. We take dream like being like a tree or a wild pig or something. We cannot say what makes a wild pig. Well, if we believe in God, then we'll say God makes the wild pigs. But about that, it is that unknown power or mysterious force which makes all existence. The best perhaps is to call it with a vague expression, the Godhead or nature, which in such a vague sense that we don't pin it down to anything special, because we just don't know. The only thing by observing dreams for a long time is that we see it has a superior intelligence in it. Perhaps you have seen that in some of the dreams, the wisdom and the intelligence and the guiding cleverness with which dreams lead us. They show us where we are wrong, they show us where we are unadapted, they warn us from danger, they predict some future events in our life, they they hint at the deeper meaning of our life. They convey to us illuminating insights.
I remember the ones that make me most comfortable. I'm sure there's a lot that I have that I block out. If you want to remember a dream, you have to write it down immediately when you wake up. And they'll tell you a lot about how you really feel.
I have children, and sometimes I'll dream about my kids getting lost, you know, and then I get real frantic in my dreams. I have a bad dream. But then when I try to tell myself, you know, figure out why I had that dream, sometimes it's because I feel guilty for not spending enough time with them and they're home supervising themselves. And so it's kind of making me like my conscience coming to life, you know, making me aware of what I was subconsciously thinking of throughout the day.
Dreams are compensation, and I suppose useful if you can remember them in finding out what kind of games you're playing with yourself, and then you can do something about it. And that's how I see dreams.
The dreams cannot prevent us from the vicissitudes and illness and sad events of human existence, but they seem to be able to give us a guiding line how to cope with them and how to find a meaning in our life and how to fulfill our own destiny, how to follow our own star, to realize our greater potential of life within us.
Dr. von Franz, how did you first become interested in the study of dreams?
When I met Jung first, he explained something about a case he had who had a vision, and he interpreted the vision of that woman. And that gave me the shock-like realization that for him inner events like visions or dreams were the reality. They were a reality as real as the outer, what we call the outer reality. And that was a great revelation and a great shock to me. And then I went and read the books of Jung, and there I saw the importance he gave to dreams, and I felt I could never really judge if what he was saying was true or not true, or right or not right, if I wouldn't go through an analysis myself. So I took my whole courage in my hands and asked him if I could have an analysis with him, and he agreed to that. And then every dream interpretation was a revelation. I seem to have, according to Jung, especially difficult and complicated dreams, so I never understood a word of my own dreams. They were just Chinese puzzling nonsense. And I always arrived with that Chinese puzzling nonsense to Jung, and he, with a big effort, unfolded the whole meaning of it. Sometimes he took a handkerchief and wiped his head and said, "What would you do if you hadn't a Jung to get through that complicated dream?" And it was always a surprising revelation, and that lasted on as long as I worked with him. Later, when he got old, I didn't tell him so many dreams anymore because I saw that it tired him. Dream interpretation is a real physical effort. It's not just a mental exercise. And therefore, later I tried to cope with it as well as I could myself. But first, the first years of my analysis, the work mostly consisted in unraveling those Chinese messages of the night. And I always remember going there in a tense, nervous, often depressed mood, and always coming back after the hour with the feeling of, now I know, now I see where the whole thing is going.
Mm-hmm. Many of the people we talk to were interested in their dreams and would like to know what they mean, but very few go into psychoanalysis. Do you feel that dream interpretation is so difficult that it's only accessible to an elite?
Yes, I think it's like with all sciences. It will be only an elite which will go into all the intricacies and the scientific complications of the dream interpretation and its question. It's a profession, and it needs professional skill, and the man in the street cannot pick it up and know it as well. But like all sciences too, certain rules of the thumb, certain generalities can be spread to the general public. And also I would say it is already very helpful for people who don't want to go into analysis and who don't want to plunge into that complicated scientific dream interpretation problem to watch their dreams, because among 20 unintelligible dreams, there are always from time to time very simple dreams, which everybody can see at once. The unconscious is a great, among other things, a great joker, a great jester. And from time to time he tells people just write out bang, so that while you write the dream down you just explode with laughter and you know what it is. Just the other day I was very ill and revolting against my illness, and I dreamt that I was in a festival to let old soldiers home from military service, and they handed in their carpenter's tool, and I saw that they were terribly old, they were 100 years old, and somebody said into my ear, yes, they have kept those people much too long in active service. Now, you don't need to pay an analyst to understand that dream. I've at once reduced my work drastically.
I was back visiting some people in Illinois, and I was thinking about a girlfriend that I had. And that night I was laying in bed, and I had a dream that I was on the same beach. I was throwing these rocks in the water, and a hand grabbed me from behind and said, "Don't ever let go of the things you love." And I was thinking about all the things, how I'd cope with it if I didn't have it. I turned around, it was gone. I opened up my hand, and there was a picture of my girlfriend in my hand. And it really got me to thinking that I shouldn't give up on it so quick, and I haven't. So that was about the most influential dream I had.
But many of our dreams are not obvious. I've had dreams that I was sure I understood, but after I worked on them, I was shocked to see I'd tricked myself.
That's why one should in general not interpret one's own dreams, because our dreams generally point to our blind spot. And they never tell us what we know, they always tell us what we don't know. But people tend, when they interpret their own dreams, to say, yes, I know what that means, and then they project what they know already into the dream. Oh, that's my problem, so and so and so and so. I have often even patients who do that. They come in and they say, I have a dream, but I know what it means. They don't want to hear what I say. They say, I know what it means. And then they give a completely banal explanation of something they know already long ago about themselves. And then I always say, wait, let's take the dream as it is, slowly, with beginning to end. And then it always comes out quite differently and surprisingly. So to interpret one's own dream is very, very difficult. That's why Jung advised even Jungian analysts to from time to time go to colleagues and exchange their views of dreams, to not go on lonely, always interpreting their own dreams. And Jung even himself, he always complained bitterly, I have no Jung to interpret my dreams, he said. And so he used his own pupils and told his dreams. Because even when you tell it, and even if the other says something stupid, it might you get another slant on it, and then you are more objective about it. I always say you can't see your own, everybody can see your back if you show it to the other person, but you can't see your own back. That's the trouble, and the dreams point to your own back, to what you don't see. And you have to, so to speak, stand on your head to understand your own dreams. That's the great difficulty. And that causes so many errors, because people always say, oh, I know what that means. I had a schizophrenic patient, she came always with a ready-made interpretation. And it was always a complete banal outer nonsense. She took it out of such kitchen dream books. Oh, it means that I'll get some money, or it means I'll get that job, or I won't get that job, and so on. And the dreams had nothing to do with it.
But if it's so beneficial to look behind your own back, then why is it that so many people resist taking the dream world seriously?
The unconscious itself can devour the human being. The dream world, that is why the dream world has not, we now are discovering that the dream world is the most beneficent thing on earth, and that attending one's dream is the healthiest thing one can do. But why then has mankind also always been afraid of the dream world? There is a good reason for this. The dream world can also devour us by the way of daydreaming, of spinning neurotic fantasies, or by spinning, chasing unrealistic ideas. You have only to go into a lunatic asylum to see the victims of the dream world. One is living in the dream that he's Napoleon, sitting for 20 years like that in an asylum. Another, when you begin to talk to him, tells you confidently that he's really Jesus Christ, but nobody seems to understand him, and so on. They have been swallowed by the dream world. And that's why the devouring, when we speak of the devouring unconscious or the devouring mother, it is that dangerous aspect of the dream world. The dream world is only beneficent and healing if we have a dialogue with this, but we are in actual life. We must not forget living. The actual real life and the duties of actual real living must not be neglected. As soon as one begins to neglect outer life, one's own body, eating, doing one's ordinary job, and so on, then the dream world becomes dangerous. It can suck us away from reality and spin us into some neurotic or even psychotic unreality, into a fantasy world which is not constructive. So the dream world is only positive if it is in a living dialogue and in balance with a actually lived life.
We've talked about the positive effect of dreams and their power to transform people's lives. Have you had dreams yourself which changed the course of your life?
Yes, I had many dreams which changed my life, and which I experienced as a great revelation which changed the course of my life. But I had really only one dream which I think is the biggest dream of my life, and that dream I dreamt between having met Jung and between having asked him for analysis. When I was still 18, and in the Christmas night I had a big, what Jung would call an archetypal dream, a religious dream, and that I consider still today the biggest dream of my life. But it is a very long mythological descent in the underworld. One could sum it up as a descent into Hades in the underworld, and in finding the mystical water of alchemy and discovering that and coming back with it, a kind of shamanistic journey into the underworld and into the land of death. And that I consider the biggest dream I ever had. I woke up deeply shaken. I was so shaken that I couldn't get up for a few hours. I had to stay in bed shivering till I had the courage to get up and put my clothes on again. And I told that dream Jung, but he never interpreted it to me. He only said, I knew you had something to do with alchemy. Just when I met you, I knew that was so, and now we see. And so that laid the basis of my collaboration with Jung on the symbolism of alchemy.
Excuse me, we're doing a documentary film on dreams.
You gotta be kidding.
No.
On dreams?
On dreams, yeah. What do you think about dreams?
What do I think about dreams? I think they're nice.
You think you pay attention to your own dreams?
What do you mean, do I pay attention to them?
Do you remember any of your dreams?
Oh, sure.
Why?
Why do I remember them?
Yeah.
I don't know. Why do you remember that you go to sleep and you wake up?
Can you recall them?
What do you mean? Well, sure.
Tell us one.
Oh, excuse me. You have the usual flying dreams, I suppose. For some reason or the other, every once in a while I find myself flying around in an Edsel. Don't ask me why. Now, you make an Edsel. I can't help it. You guys got to be crazy. Why would anybody be doing a documentary on dreams?
Tell us about the Edsel. How well does the Edsel fly?
That's great. It's great. The only thing is, when you're flying, you have to be sure that you keep on thinking about flying, because if you don't, the thing comes down.
Did it ever crash on you?
Oh no, just sort of floats down. You know, Edsels.
Thanks very much.
Enjoy it, gentlemen. You really are crazy.
As we continue, you will come to know Dr. von Franz more and more. I would like to introduce her by quoting one of her pithy remarks. Too many people use the tit of compassion when they should use the sword of discretion. She does say it like it is. I remember talking to her after she did the film. I had been to the opening in Boston, and we had difficulty there because too many people, guests in the hotel, the waiters, and others were coming in and just slipping through and were fascinated by the film, so there wasn't room for our own audience. And she laughed and laughed, and she said, "That makes me very happy. I like to think that this film will go out to people who are not aware of their dreams and do not understand the unconscious." I am honored to introduce this woman, to have you share her wisdom, her sense of humor, and her profound humanness. I am honored to bring The Way of the Dream with Marie-Louise von Franz. I am also honored to introduce the director-producer of the film, Fraser Boa. For 3 years, he labored to bring the dream to reality with patience, with discretion, with commitment. He gradually brought the images to life. I am honored to introduce you to my brother.
Dreams have been called the royal road to the unconscious. We'll be traveling down that royal road, but first we're going to look at a map. C.G. Jung discovered that in the apparent chaos of dreams, there are recurring figures and motifs which he documented and named. These landmarks are easily recognizable, and they act as reference points in dream interpretation. Once seen, then dreams begin to make some sense. But there's nothing to interpret if you haven't got a dream.
Well, I don't have too much experience with with dreams, but I guess some people do.
Did you ever have a dream that you thought was important?
If I did, it was forgotten right away. Yeah.
The main thing I remember about them is I can't really remember them, unfortunately.
Can't recall any that I've had lately.
In the moment, I can't tell you any dream. I don't remember it in the moment.
Every night? Would you tell us a dream? Do you recall them? Do you remember your dreams?
No, I don't, sir. I quickly forget.
Dr. von Franz, why is it that people can't recall their dreams?
I think it's because they don't pay attention. Some people have come to me laughingly and said, "You analyze people with their dreams, don't you?" Well, you can't with me because I never dream. And I've just grinned and said, "Okay, let's see." They always dreamt. It was just that they didn't pay attention. But the next night they go to bed and they think, wonder if I dream or if I don't dream. And already that question probably tickles out a dream and the dream appears. So in fact, I have never met anybody who didn't dream. Except you can say that in very, very heavy state of depression, people have a what I call dream constipation. They don't dream much sometimes, and they always feel better. As soon as they begin to dream, they are better. And sometimes in very old people, over 80, the dreams get fewer, very few dreams. And then come up again frequently shortly before death. Then generally there's a period where people dream again.
Well, now, I'll tell you, I don't have very good memory. Now, I'm pretty near 90 years old.
Are you really?
And I just can't, I know I used to dream a lot, but I don't dream anymore.
Do you remember any of the dreams you used to have?
Well, not this moment, but maybe after I get walking away, I'll think of them.
What happens when people don't remember their dreams? What happens to the energies? What happens to the feelings that aren't expressed and the potentials that aren't realized?
They are the sources of what we call neurosis, neurotic symptoms. The most general neurotic symptom is restlessness. That isn't yet looked at in modern times because everybody is so restless. It isn't looked at to be a neurosis, to be restless, but it is actually. Primitive man or the Hindu or the Chinese criticize the white race very much for being constantly restless. And you can see that those are those energies which, because we are not connected with the dream world, with the unconscious, we have a surplus of bottled up energy which makes us fuss around all the time. Or it can take the form of a kind of all-pervading anxiety, a fear that somewhere something dark is luring and might happen any minute, and then one is anxious about nothing all the time. That is also an unawareness that there is bottled up energy in the unconscious, which we do not tap and which we do not integrate in consciousness. Irritability, aggressiveness, over-sexiness, or a feeling of complete meaningless emptiness, all the different symptoms of different neurotic diseases come from that. So we can say if you are not connected properly with your own dream life, then you are liable to develop some kind of neurotic behavior.
In everyday speech, we often say that a person has a complex, power complex, inferiority complex, mother complex. Would you explain the psychological meaning of the word complex?
Well, a complex is simply the motor of the psyche. They are like different nuclear centers which give the drive and the impulse and the aliveness to the psyche. If we had no complexes, we would be dead. You see that at once. For instance, you are somewhere and you are terribly bored, and then something touches your complex, and you go and you get going. Your interest is aroused. That is because the complex has been touched. So the complex are simply the energy centers of the psyche. But we generally, in colloquial language, use it only in its negative form. We say somebody has a sex complex or a money complex or a mother complex, and then it means that this special theme arouses the person negatively.
We filmed the dream of a young woman in which the complex is personified by the father. All the energies of the dream focus around this father figure, and she eventually finds him sitting at the wheel of a car, apparently dead.
I went out and I noticed in the porch my father's car was still there, and he was at the wheel, motionless, bent forward as if about to drive, but not moving. And I realized then that he may be dead, and I should call an ambulance. But I looked around the driveway. There was a circular driveway. The driveway was filled with balloons, hundreds and hundreds of white balloons. And the thought came to me then that before an ambulance could get to him, every one of those balloons have to be burst.
We've said that dreams reveal the unconscious of an individual. What do you mean by the term unconscious?
all that which we know is psychically real but is not conscious. It's a borderline concept. It's not conscious. It's a negative concept. And we use that negative concept in order to not have a prejudice, because some people call it supra-consciousness, and others would call it the divine sphere, and others would call it the existential ground of existence, or you can have 1,000 names. We prefer the word unconscious because it says nothing. It says only it is not conscious, and it leaves it as a mystery. We don't know what it is. We only know that there are psychic phenomena which manifest through dreams or through involuntary gestures or speech mistakes or hallucinations or fantasies, and which are not conscious. You can, for instance, be befallen in daytime by a fantasy and tell it to your analyst and say it's a completely weird fantasy, it's crazy, I don't know what it means. So, as you don't know what it means and you think it's crazy, it's obviously not conscious. Because if it were conscious, you would know what it means, and you would know to what it refers to. But it has come, now it is psychic, it has not happened materially, it has happened as a psychic event. And that's why we call the sum of all psychic events which are not conscious, the unconscious.
But many people don't realize that dreams reveal the unconscious. That every element of a dream represents some aspect of their own personality. If, for example, a person dreams about wrestling with a dark stranger, what's difficult to understand is that the dark stranger represents some aspect of themselves that they're wrestling with. Let's look now at what Jung called the shadow.
When I was younger, I used to sort of get dreams about when people were chasing me, and I'd be running along, and I couldn't run fast. I was as if I was being pulled back, and you know, these people were getting nearer, and it was really frightening.
One typical nightmare is that one is pursued by some terrible or demonic or unknown power, and one runs and runs for one's life, and knowing all the time in the dream that finally they will get one. And you hide, and you can't hide, and they will see you, and you look for another hiding place, and they will discover you again, and you run and run. Persecution always means something wants to come to us. The only way to meet a persecuting demon is to turn around and to say, here I am, what do you want from me? Then the nightmarish pursuer generally changes face. It simply represents that we have turned away from some part of our psyche, and therefore it runs after us, it wants to get at us, literally. But we don't want it. The unconscious shows us the face we show it. If we reject something within us, then it becomes destructive to us. And if we don't reject it, that's what I mean by saying turning around and saying in a friendly manner, what do you want? Then you suddenly see that it isn't so bad. Then you have a chance that whatever pursues one shows a more amenable face, and that one can make some pact with it or some arrangement.
Yes, I had a particular one as a child where I dreamed I was in a room full of people who got up and said good night and left me alone, and then I waited for it, some frightful spectre came in through the door, and I had that dream 3 times running.
There was a little tiny window, and in there was the wild woman, and she'd been there since 1928, and she was so wild that she couldn't keep still at all. Her arms and legs kept moving, and her hair was everywhere. You couldn't see her face at all. Somebody else went over to her to talk to her, and she put a knife to their throat.
I had a bad dream about somebody who was vicious to me, or was going to attack me in my dream, and somebody I knew, and I met him on the street and I wanted to punch him in the mouth.
The shadow is the name we generally use for persons of the same sex appearing in dreams, which very often have a slight inferior quality or opposite quality to the ego of the dreamer. The shadow can be our inferior side, our best enemy, so to speak, but can also have just be our other side. A beautiful couple of ego and his shadow are, for instance, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, the one being completely crazy and unrealistic, and the other being a body man, down to earth. They can't live without each other. Sancho is not evil and Don Quixote is not only good, but they are a typical example of the ego and its shadow in 1,000 forms.
We film quite a humorous example of the interplay between the shadow and the ego. In the dream, the shadow takes the form of a popular rock star who quite literally hooks the dreamer.
In this dream, I'm going to a David Bowie concert, and I've decided I want to meet this man, David Bowie. And I come into this large, like, circus tent that's lit with many different colored lights. And I have a sense of being in sort of a tale of the Arabian Nights. The show begins, and he comes out and begins to sing a song of his, which is called Move On, Move On. And throughout this dream, there's this sort of repetitive theme of move on, move on. And come intermission time, the stage is emptied, and a crane comes out, and a hook comes down and grabs me, pulls me up, brings me over the stage, and drops me onto the stage. And I just feel myself falling and falling and falling, and I realize that I've messed this thing up. And I wake in an incredible panic, realizing that I've missed an opportunity. I've missed a chance for something.
Let's leave the shadow now and move on to other figures of the unconscious. The women in the dreams of men and the men in the dreams of women. Jung says that, psychologically speaking, every man has an inner woman and every woman has an inner man. Many people find that a difficult concept to understand.
Well, we well know that we are born from genes, and that only the predominance of male or female genes make the gender of a child. And there are even androgynous creatures sometimes where even nature can't make up quite their mind what to produce, a man or a woman. And even every man has breasts and nipples on the breasts, and, so to speak, a sketched feminine side, and the woman has a clitoris and a sketched masculine side, and the same is true for the psyche. Not only our body is predominantly male or female, but having the other element in it, our psyche too is predominantly male or female, but contains the other side.
And isn't it interesting how the feminine side of a man's personality in his dreams takes just as many forms as there are women in real life?
I think that most of us, when we dream, we think of women.
At that moment in time, I believe I started to stroke her, and I inserted my hand into the lower part of her bikini, and I was fondling her and stroking her. And suddenly she said, "I don't want your hand." She said, "I want your penis. I want you to make love to me." And I said, "Oh no, if I did that, then if I entered it, I would be afraid that then she would change completely into a fully fledged vampire, blood-sucking vampire, and I would be lost."
Well, I have dreams about Greta Garbo, who I was mad about for a long time.
I was standing at the top of a huge staircase, and it was a well staircase, and it sort of wound round down. You could see it descending. It was quite high up. And there were lots of people screaming and rushing about in agitation, because slowly up the stairs was coming this dead 15-year-old girl.
Men have always created an idealized form of a woman. Marilyn Monroe, for example, was worshipped like a goddess. Is there an equivalent masculine figure, an idealized masculine figure?
What Marilyn Monroe has been to men, Valentino has been to women. He represents, so to speak, the ideal demon lover. where women are carried away into a romantic ecstasy and fantasize to be like the chic in more modern films, to be carried away by the demon lover into a romantic us two aloneness.
And then I was followed by a tall blonde man who wrapped me up in his cloak and took me to his gypsy caravan.
I've even dreamt I was dancing with Humphrey Bogart when he hadn't got a stitch on. How about that?
Generally, especially if the women are such women who are unhappy in their relationship to their husband or to their lover, the fantasy, therefore, of being carried away and having a secret nocturnal love affair with animus and anima. Animus and anima are therefore very ambiguous, very dangerous inner figures, which have to be approached with great wisdom. They are the great mischief makers between men and women.
We talked about figures of the same sex as the dreamer and figures of the opposite sex. Let's look now at the figure which Jung described as the center of the psyche, the self.
In most religious systems, you have an allusion to a kind of divine center from which everything, all order and all organization stems. And if we can find out where dreams come, we can say from that center, whatever that center is. That center appears in the dreams itself, sometimes as a center, as a mandala, as an inner city, as a circle or a square, or some other abstract formation, or it appears as a divine savior child, as a savior figure, as a wise old man or wise old woman figure personified, something, a psychopomp, something which guides our psychic life. All these figures seem to point to that ultimately unknown and unknowable greater center in our psyche. Nowadays we speak very much of self-realization, and there's always the danger of mixing this up with what Jung meant by this, the self. For Jung, the self, written with a capital, is meant to be that supraordinate inner divine center, unknown divine center of the psyche, which we have to explore all our lifetime. Nobody knows what the self in him is and wants from him. We need the dreams. We can say the dreams are the letters of the self, which the self writes us every night, telling us, do a bit more of that, or do a bit less of that, or go ahead to the left, or go ahead to the right. And as I say, if one looks back, one sees suddenly there is a pattern in this, as if the self with the capital is having a plan with us, a kind of destiny. While what in general psychological literature is meant by self-realization is more building up a strong ego consciousness. That is also something important, especially in the first half of life, but it's nothing to do with the adventure of encountering the self within one. That is not self-realization in the ordinary sense of the word. It's an adventurous encounter with a greater inner center within oneself.
Would you say more about the pattern of dreams? Is there an overall pattern which unfolds over a person's lifetime?
In the first half of life, it's directed more towards an outgoing adaptation to earthly and material outer life, and in the second half of life it generally begins to steer the individual more towards withdrawal and to develop a certain wisdom and a certain insight into the background of life. And the last dreams of dying people are a clear preparation for death. Ultimately, we don't know where we come from psychologically speaking, and we don't know where we go. We are part of that cosmic mystery which is the existence of nature and all things. We don't know why there are galaxies and stars, we don't know why there is a universe. And we only begin to realize that there are certain master patterns, and it looks as if our psychological inner life is also organized by a master pattern. It's centered somewhere. There is a directing force. It's not a chaotic, random thing or phenomenon. And when people get very old, they have therefore an inclination to go through their lives and muse again over their big events in life and their dreams. And if one does that carefully, one generally sees a certain pattern in it. Problems which solve themselves, which pose themselves, solve themselves, switch over into new problems. There seems to be a secret organization. And the center of that organization is what the mystics would call the divine spark in the psyche, or the God image in the human psyche. The Western mystics, the Buddhist would call it the Buddha mind in us.
Jung dreamt of the self in the form of the yogi. You remember he was walking down the road and came to the little chapel? There were no crucifixes or statues, just the flower arrangement. And Jung saw the yogi sitting in front of the altar. The yogi was in a state of deep meditation.
Jung realized with a shock that this was the yogin who was imagining him, and that in the trance he was in a kind of active imagination, imagining the life of Jung, dreaming him, and that when the yogin would wake up, Jung, would no longer exist. The ordinary Professor Jung, was the dream of that greater inner figure.
That reminds me of the dream of Chang Tzu.
He dreamt that he was a butterfly, and now he's puzzling all the time. Is he a man who dreamt that he was a butterfly, or is he a butterfly who dreamt that he was a man? That is very true. We cannot figure that out. A butterfly is a symbol of the soul. Are we the dream of the self, or is the self our dream? We don't know.
To interpret a dream, we have to look at the structure. Each of the dreams we have in our lifetime is unique. Some seem straightforward and others more complex, but each is spontaneous and unpredictable. It's surprising, therefore, to realize that dreams do have a structure, an actual framework around which the dream is organized. And when we start to trace the outline of that structure, then the random flow of images and events starts to make sense. Excuse me. We're doing a documentary film on dreams.
Oh, really?
Yes. You're interested in dreams?
Yes.
Why?
Why? Because I'm interested in my life, and I believe they reveal my life to me.
Tell us a dream. I fly often.
How do you fly? Do you have a motor, or do you just fly with your arms? Do you have to flap your arms?
Nah, it's mental. Mental. Just think about leaving, and I do.
Do you think dreams are important?
Aye, that they certainly be. I write them down often.
Why?
Aye, because they tell your future or tell how you are feeling. Most definitely.
Can you think of an example of your own dreams which told you something of the future?
Aye, but they tell me how I feel if something is heavy upon me. I cannot move when things are heavy upon me. Or I be smashed by boulders or some type of weird objects that are very heavy upon my head or shoulders.
The things you are thinking and worrying about during the day, they come back in the night, in dreams. And you get lost of your worries in dreams.
You can imagine things and do things in dreams that you can't do in real life.
Do you remember your dream?
I do remember, and sometimes they tell me what is going to happen, or whatever happened during the day gets totally changed at night in the dream state the way I wish it would have happened.
With me, I find dreams that I remember have elements of thoughts from my day thrown together in a different way than they actually happened.
they probably reflect something of reality, of everyday existence, you know. But what, I'm not sure, you know.
Dr. von Franz, how much of dream interpretation is scientific and how much is art?
I think there's something of both in it. There's a lot of, Jung has really laid down a lot of helpful rules which are purely technical or scientific, which you can apply according to rules of thumb. And whenever I don't understand a dream, I go back to them. I say, now, what is the exposition of the dream? What is the setting up? What is the association? And so on. By collecting the association, you can generally get quite far with the technique. But naturally, there's additionally, especially through long practice, is a kind of practitioner's skill which you develop, which you can't impart to a beginner. It's like an old carpenter. He cannot tell a young carpenter. He tells him how to use the tools and how to measure and how to cut the wood, but there's a certain touch of the wood which he can't convey to the beginner. The beginner has to work 20 years with wood, and then he'll have the same kind of touch. And when one has interpreted many dreams and puzzled about many dreams, one gets a certain hang of it, so to speak. Professional skill, which has to do with feeling and with a mediumistic feeling, with an empathy also into the other person.
People everywhere are intrigued by their dreams and want to know what they mean.
Well, they give me different feelings, you know, they're emotional, dreams are. But I can't, you know, I don't understand what they do.
Because they're part of you, because I dream them, they're obviously part of me, but they're a part of me I have absolutely no connection with at all.
I think they're fun. Interesting. I mean, yeah. I like analyzing them. Like, not that I know what they mean, but it's fun to try to find meaning.
In Jungian psychology, we have a technique, and that is we compare it to a drama. We take the exposition, the naming of the problem, the peripetia, that would be the ups and downs of the story, and the lysis, the solution or catastrophe. And if I don't understand the dream, I use that schematic. I say, now what's the introduction?
I had a dream that I was walking down by a small lake, and I saw these three women who wanted to go into the lake, but I felt that I needed to caution them. I felt there was something ominous in the lake.
I'm walking through very deep snow. On my right, there is quite a high fence. And as I'm walking along, I'm thinking, if violence is going to break out, what am I going to do?
I was in a village hall organizing a concert or something.
Once I was up at the clouds, like just all these fluffy clouds. Sat just in the clouds there and had tea with somebody.
On first glance, dreams seem to be bizarre nonsense. Do you have a general rule in approaching a specific dream?
The first sentence of a dream generally gives the situation, and also the first sentences give who I am with. Either I wake up at home, or I am still at my childhood home with my parents there, or I am at the university lecturing, I'm in my professional situation, I am with my friend Bob, I am with my friend so-and-so. And then you just take the first sentence and you ask the dreamer what it is, what was your childhood home like? How did you feel there? Were you happy there? How long did you stay there? And so on. So then and with whom are you? With your friend Bob. How is your friend Bob? Oh, he was a bore, but we did all our childhood mischief together with him, and whatever the people tell you. And then you kind of insert these, what we call associations, into the text. Then it would be, I am in a situation, I am psychologically still in my boyhood situation, and I am with a part of myself which is boring but also mischievous. That would be the translation. Now, then you have naturally to think that applies to the moment of the dream. So in what way is the dreamer, when one leg still in his childhood home, where is he still reacting like he reacted as a boy? The dream is speaking about that corner of his personality. You have to assume. Then you come to the naming of the problem. A car comes up the driveway and two dark men jump out or something like that, some dramatic the evolution. So that means now a special story is told. For instance, what I just mentioned would be an invasion, something which is breaking in, burglary. Burglars very often represent something breaking into one's conscious system. So it would mean in a corner where one still has childish reaction, something from the collective unconscious breaks in. So then we have the second sentence of the dream. And so we go through the whole dream, and the last sentence is always what it is driving at, to a solution or a catastrophe. What is the... I generally know this rule of interpretation so well that I kind of follow it half unconsciously, but I always specially attend to the last sentence of the dream, because some dreams peter out and they are not favorable. They mean that the unconscious itself has no solution. But otherwise, if you wake up with a cry or something happens at the end of the dream, that's the solution. That's what gives you the waking shock. That has to be specially realized.
I went back into the water and came face to face with what I thought would be a creature. And it turned out to be an ape-like figure with almost completely wrapped in bandages, almost like a mummy. And I confronted it and looked right at it and still remember the face. Gorilla-like face, really stern. I could sense there was an ape under the bandages.
You can, the best if you want to interpret your dream yourself, you write on one half of the paper the dream, and then to every word in the dream you write down your associations. And that means you are completely, what spontaneously comes to your mind.
And once the associations have been listed on the other side of the page, then how does the person proceed?
Then you try to show if you have a connection. If you are, the first sentence said, I am in my childhood home, that means where I am still childlike. Burglars come in, so something is breaking in. And then sometimes you don't understand why does something break into my psychological system. Now you have to also think of the day before and what happened before, inwardly and outwardly. You might, for instance, have the day before had some disagreeable experience, and those burglars refer to that disagreeable experience you had the day before. There's something broke into your system. Or you might have had a negative, destructive thought right from within. That might also be represented by burglars. Something destructive or negative suddenly breaking into your system. So you have to shortly try to remember what happened yesterday, outwardly and inwardly, main lines. And then you probably can make a meaningful connection. Then you see, aha, it refers to that. It refers to that thought I had yesterday or that experience, and it shows me that I behaved in the right way or in the wrong way. It kind of corrects one's attitude.
We filmed an amusing dream in Hawaii that made the dreamer feel a bit guilty.
Well, I'm a very, very happily married fellow, and my wife's in Arizona right now with our child visiting her folks. And I don't know why, but I started dreaming I was at a high school prom with one of the girls who works here, and there was nothing lustrous about the dream, but I have this little sense of guilt about dreaming I was spending time with another woman somewhere while my wife's away. I suppose that's a natural consequence. In fact, I even shared it with the girl this morning, just to alleviate any guilt I might have.
We've said that every element of a dream represents some aspect of the dreamer's personality, but that's not always true. There are dreams which are obviously about outer events. Many people dream about the death of a close relative, and in fact they do die. When you interpret a dream, how do you know whether it's about an inner reality or the outer reality? For example, a man dreams about his wife stealing his car. Is she actually stealing his car? Or how do you interpret the dream?
There one comes to the most ticklish problem of it all. Because the question, he will be inclined to think, there you see, that's exactly what she's doing. She's always taking away my ways of moving about. She's always interfering. And you are not so sure. It might just as well mean that that it is a so-called projection, namely that his own feminine side is stealing the car, and that he only projects that onto his wife. He thinks his wife does it. He sees it in her, so to speak, while he's really doing it unconsciously to himself. So that's why if one wants to interpret these dreams correctly, one has to know the whole marital situation, one has to know the wife, and have an idea of her objective behavior, and then one can evaluate, no, that is a projection, it's really what this man is doing to himself, unconsciously, or it refers really to the wife. And sometimes it also does to both. That's the problem, what we call subjective or objective interpretation. Referring to an outer object, the wife is really stealing the car, or referring to the subject itself is stealing its own car with his left hand, so to speak, or his feminine unconscious side is stealing his own car. Generally, it's one can say that about, I would say, I have never made a statistic, but I would think that about 85% of the dream motives are subjective, and that therefore it is recommendable to mostly interpret dreams subjectively, to always say, what is it in me which does that, instead of taking it as a warning against outer people.
And what happens if the dreamer has no personal associations to the image?
There are so-called archetypal dreams with big mythological meaning, and there generally people have no associations. If you say, what do you think about Jupiter? Jupiter, it's a star. They don't know what to associate. They have no personal things to come to them. In that case, you have to take the association of mankind. What has mankind fantasized about Jupiter? What has mankind fantasized about Saturn? And put that into the text of the dream, so to speak.
A lot of people have a sense that their dreams are really telling them something, and they want to understand it, but they're unable to.
Do you remember any dreams?
Sometimes, yeah. Wake up that you would remember, but then by the time the afternoon comes, I forget them. Yeah.
Could you tell us one?
Flying. Yes. Just flying somewhere, going nowhere, you know? It's just like, keeps going and going, not reaching anything. And it was really scary, and I came to work and I told the girls, I got a book on dreams to find out what it meant, and couldn't find it.
I know analysts who've interpreted other people's dreams for years, and they can't interpret their own dreams. Why is it that a person can't interpret their own dream?
The dream never tells you what you know already. It always points to something you don't know, to a blind spot. And can you see your own back? You can show your own back to anybody, and the doctor can see what's the matter with your back, but you can't see it. And so your own psychological blind spots are like your back or your arse, you sit on them. And that's why sometimes the dream tells you obvious things and you can't see them. You need another person to tell you. And then you think, oh Lord, naturally, that's it. But it's very difficult to interpret one's own dreams. If one has to, but it is helpful to have another eye on it. Even somebody who doesn't know about dreams, it's good to talk to somebody about it. But while talking and while explaining to the other or giving association, one very often gets it. Jung, for instance, had nobody to interpret his dreams. So he had a man who knew nothing about dreams. He always told him to a large extent his dreams, and that man made off-the-point remarks, and they got Jung onto the track. And he said laughingly, just the off-to-the-point remarks of this man made me feel, no, it isn't that, but I know now what it is.
Because in the country, we're all in a house with a lake in front of it. And the top floor flips over. And all of us who are in bed upstairs get flipped into the front yard. And I get flipped into the yard in front. And my parents got flipped into the water. And I told my stepmother the dream. And she said, oh yes, very significant, because people falling into the water, all very sexual and everything. But I didn't tell her was that when she'd fallen in, she and my father were making love at the time, and that I didn't quite make it into the water, and I didn't quite make it into the sea of life or something.
Yeah, I dreamt I was catching a fish, and every time it keeps slipping away. I mean, that means pregnancy, It was my girlfriend.
Many people use dream dictionaries to interpret dreams. What do you think of these books?
I think they are very, very bad, because they get you off the track. Because generally it's a static interpretation. A snake means an illness or means the death of a relative. Breaking teeth means the loss of the parents or whatever. You know, I mean, there are more primitive and more differentiated ways. There are now also modern dictionaries which are a bit more differentiated. But still, it's always a fixed meaning.
Do you remember a dream?
Yes, I remember one dream. I just fell down into a lake. It was terrible. And there were a lot of snakes, so I must say, perhaps for a psychologist it's very bad. But I don't feel like that. I always felt I am very happy, so...
No snakes?
No.
The dream symbolism in our experience is very much more individual. It is always what that symbol means to me and what I have experienced with it, which counts. And therefore, one can sometimes let oneself be inspired by looking at one of those modern dictionaries to see what all possibilities, what the snake can all mean or what the peacock can all mean. But then I had to always return to say, what does it mean to me? And that is always much more specific.
So what value are dreams in your work as an analyst?
I don't work with anything else. In our way of thought, we only operate with dreams, because the dreams are what comes out of the dreamer. The great danger of all psychological helping profession is that one interferes with the other person's life, that one has... Think, for instance, of the idea, what is normal? You have an idea of normality and you think the other should become normal. That's interference, that's a power attitude. Perhaps destiny or God or whatever you want to call the greater powers in the world don't want this man to be normal. How do I know that he or she ought to be normal? And on top of it, normal what I think is normal. My bourgeois ideas of normality, forced upon a poor human being who is destined to be very different. So if you think of that, you don't know, when a human being comes to you with a problem, if you are honest, you have to say, I have no idea where the problem comes from. Well, any idea you have about the patient, well, that the patient should become normal, that he or she should become socially adapted, are just prejudices. You have, in fact, if you are honest, you have to say you have no idea why somebody has a psychological problem and what it is there for, and to what you don't. We cannot know a human being's destiny. You haven't. I have seen, for instance, the other day, dreams of a little girl of 7 years old, which were the dreams of a dying person. Now, actually, she had had a cancer operation. I didn't know it when I saw the dreams, but she's probably not living more than 2 or 3 years anymore. And she had the dreams of a old, wise personality. So you see how you cannot have theories, how a human life ought to be or should be. And therefore, dreams are the only thing which comes out of the patient himself. And if we try to understand dreams with as little prejudices as possible, we kind of try to find out what does the depth, the psychological depth of that patient himself tell him about him. And we, the psychotherapist, is only the translator, the dream translator, so that the analysis amounts to saying your own psychic depth thinks, let's take the man who is too juvenile, thinks of you that you are a bit too juvenile and damaging your health about being too juvenile. That's not my opinion, it's what we have extracted from the man's dream. And that generally hits home, because the patient feels it's not the analyst's opinion. If you interpret the dream properly, generally what we say clicks. It clicks with the analyst and he says yes, and then he's impressed, and that is likely to change, to give him the motivation to change his life. While even if you would say to the same man, oh, you are behaving too young, too much like a young man, it's not good for your health, he might not listen. He's heard that before. But if his own dream laughs at him in the way I just showed, then he, at least I can only say in that actual situation, the man blushed. And that shows it, that the remark of the dream hit home. And then there is a better chance that he really changes his behavior. And so we in our school, we just go along with the dreams and try to find together with the patient, because we need the patient's association and his contributions to find out together, so to speak, in a common work, what the dream means, and leave it as that. Because generally that hits home and changes, slowly alters the personality. And then the patient doesn't feel he has been put into the straitjacket of some conception of normality or adaptation or whatever the idea is of the analyst, but is kind of having found to follow his own inner intimations, to follow what his own psyche tells him. So we are trying to educate people to be able to hear their inner voice and follow it with the help of dreams.
You're 2,000 meters up in the air.
I think.
On a little set of steps.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And you're coming down?
Yeah. No, I don't walk. I'm just on my...
On your knees?
Yeah, yeah.
You're on your knees?
Yeah.
Coming down a little set of steps.
Yeah.
2,000 meters in the air.
Yeah.
And you fall off the end.
Yeah. But when I fall down, I wake up.
And you've had that dream 2 or 3 times?
Yeah. I think 3 times.
3 times?
Yeah.
And the dream doesn't say anything to you?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't believe that it's important for my life, what I'm dreaming in the night.
Yeah.
Why do we put such emphasis on the living symbol? In the extraordinary process of dream making, the sensation comes in on the flesh, on the body, and it is carried through the transmitters, the neurotransmitters, through the various depots where the exchanges take place, and gradually that sensation comes through to the brain. And that astonishing computer takes that sensation and computes it into an image. An exact image, often put together from our past, our present, and our future. I say an exact image because we are left breathless if we follow our dreams and really understand symbol.
Symbols are to dreams what words are to language. In sleep, we speak to ourselves in the language of symbols. And the key to dream interpretation is one's knowledge of the symbol. When we're actually in a dream, whatever we experience, flying, falling, killing, makes perfect sense. But later, when we recall a dream, it seems meaningless or bizarre. We no longer understand the symbol.
Quite often I dream that I'm flying, which is quite an exhilarating experience, and suddenly it occurs to you that it's faintly ridiculous that you're actually flying.
I start running faster and faster and faster. I don't use my arms much. I don't have any other support except just my body. I flap my arms a little bit, and the longer leaps I take, the higher and the higher and the higher I go.
If you're talking about having dreams when you're sleeping, things like being caught in outer space on a deserted planet.
I've flown. It's a good, it's a high, right? It's an excellent high.
Like when you're up there, you're all by yourself, and you feel that there's nobody around you.
But that's, again, it's another dream.
I was in a grassy meadow, and it was a very warm day, and I felt very comfortable and happy. And then gradually my feeling changed, and I became edgy and nervous, and this grew even more, and I felt quite panicky and scared. Well, I was terrified. And I knew that by my left foot was a snake, before I'd even seen it. And I glanced down, and sure enough, there it was. It was a horrific looking thing, with human eyes and enormous human teeth. And I knew it was going to do me harm.
About a couple of weeks ago, I had a real bad dream about the snakes. And I was afraid that I was going to pass out, you know, because I am just terrified by snakes. When I woke up, I was sweating all over. I was sweating cold. And I was very relieved that it wasn't true.
Tell you a dream. I dream about snakes. Yeah. And, well, when you look it up, it's supposed to mean enemies.
I dreamed that I fell down from the mountains. I mean, I just fell down. I could hold me only with two hands. And then it was so bad I have to wake up because, you know, otherwise I fell. So it must be something which happened before in my life.
That's right. I dreamt once that I was, I don't know, some building of some sort. And we were just hanging around over the cliff, like, you know, over the ledge. And then we just fell. We had our foot on top of an eavesdrop. And then the eavesdrop broke, and we just kept on falling. I kept on falling. I don't know about everybody else, but I kept on falling. And that's all.
Okay, I'll tell you the dream. I moved into a house in Montreal, and it had a white staircase. And 3 nights in a row, I fell down that staircase screaming, and it never had an end. It was terrible.
I had a dream that I fell off a cliff, and I woke up, I was on the floor. That's about it on dreams.
Tell us a good nightmare.
Yeah, riding on a motorcycle down cobbled streets and then just having no street left and falling. That's awful. But I never hit the ground, which is good. I'm supposed to die.
Dr. von Franz, we've all experienced falling in dreams. What's its symbolic meaning? Is it true we're dead if we hit the ground?
I have experienced falling and not being dead, and being caught up or waking up before I hit the floor or so on. I don't think that's general.
So when you hit the floor, you're not necessarily dead.
No. It simply means a shock collision with reality. If you are too high up, if you have dreams of falling, it always means that you are somewhere too high up. Either you have a too good opinion of yourself, you are megalomaniac, or you have romantic, unreal ideas, or you are living in a make-believe world, or you are living in a theory instead of... You are somewhere missing the contact with reality. And then you have a sudden fall. And sudden fall dreams generally occur together with outer deep disappointment, when one is suddenly kind of faced with reality, naked reality as it is, and that can be a deadly shock to the ego. One can be, so to speak, be blotted out by it for a while, and that will be the death by hitting the floor. The ego is out, has nothing to say anymore.
Now I'd like to turn to one of the major symbols of our culture, the star. What is it that mankind has projected onto the star to make it symbolic?
The realm of the stars was always looked at to be the realm of the eternal divine beings, and therefore in many parts of the world there is the folklore tradition that when you see a shooting star shoot down, that is the moment the soul comes to earth and the child is born. And at the same time, as well in China as in, for instance, in the old Roman Empire, when a remarkable personality died, the astrologers went and looked at the sky for a new star, because they thought that the dying soul would return and become a star in the sky. Or for instance, in the Egyptian death ritual, the prayer goes, "Let me become one of the unsetting star which circles around the North Pole." That is the goal of the dead person, to become one of the never-setting stars. So the star has to do with uniqueness, with the uniqueness and the eternity of the uniqueness of a personality. That has been projected into a star. And for instance, the immortal spiritual part of the psyche was represented in Egypt by the Ba, the so-called Ba, which was either drawn as a bird or as a star, and meant that part of the personality which outlasts death and then accompanies after death the sun god over the sky as a never-setting star.
This is one of the rare dreams in which I heard an authoritative male voice telling me unquestionably what it wanted me to do. I could not understand it. And a voice said to me, "This is your lodestar."
Will you tell us about the Star of Bethlehem?
That fits exactly into that context, namely that when a remarkable, outstanding personality is born, a new star appears in the bright star appears in the sky, and that's how the Magi, the three kings, interpreted it at once. When they saw the Star of Bethlehem, they knew now some outstanding, important personality is born on earth, and that's why they went to see the child. That fitted the general viewpoint of the time. Everybody would have concluded that at that time. A new star, that means somewhere somebody, an emperor or a great ruler or a personality who changes the whole fate of mankind, has come to earth.
I'd like you to interpret a dream now in which the star is the central image. It's the most ancient dream in the history of mankind. The dream of Gilgamesh, king of the ancient walled city of Uruk. Gilgamesh was a powerful leader, and they felt his dream was important enough to be inscribed in stone. Here's the dream. In the middle of the night, I walked proudly up and down among my people. There were stars in the sky. Suddenly, one of the stars of the sky god Anu fell upon me. I tried to lift it, but it was too heavy for me. All Uruk assembled around this star, and the people kissed its feet. Can such an ancient dream have meaning for us today?
This dream is about 4,600 years old, and still we can find modern parallels. The language of the unconscious has changed much less than the language of human consciousness has. And so if we interpret this dream from a modern standpoint, we could say that up till the moment where the star fell upon Gilgamesh, he fulfilled a collective role of the king. He was the hero and the king, and that he probably was a very ambitious man. He made a big career. He's the typical man who follows up ambitiously and successfully a collective pattern. Nowadays he would be a great politician or a movie star or somebody, a man who has followed up certain collective alleys and reached a goal. Such a person, looked at from within, is generally very not individual. He's fulfilling a collective role and fulfilling a role of power, reacting in a very collective way. The star, on the contrary, represents, as we saw before, the uniqueness, because every soul has one star in heaven. And we can say that up till now Gilgamesh, with all his collective power achievements, has not yet done anything unique. On the contrary, he has only filled out a typical pattern of the hero king. And now, presumably about in the middle of life, because that's when the most frequently it occurs, something changes. While he's walking around the people, so to speak, proudly of his own power position, collective power position, from the sky falls a star on his back, and turns to be a very heavy load. That is the moment where the unique destiny befalls him, literally falls upon his back. That means from now on one's back one carries a load, and that means he has now, just as Christ had to carry his cross, he has now to carry like his cross the burden of having to become himself, to become the unique, chosen individual he was meant to be, and which he had avoided by being an ambitious collective man up till now. And that proves not to be a glorious call, but to be a heavy burden to him. Now, the star means also the immortal soul of man, the eternal. For instance, in Egypt, that part which survives after death freely in the Egyptian world beyond is the bar soul, which is drawn as a star. The star is the eternal kernel of the human psyche, and has always represented that, the unique, eternal man within us. And so he has now to follow his unique destiny instead of fulfilling a collective role. But the people kiss the star's feet. They prostrate themselves before the star, so that it means the real greatness is, there is probably Gilgamesh, up till the star fell upon him, also thought he was a great man. He was a king, he was a hero, he was the fortress of his people, and now he has to see not he is not much. What the people worship is that star stone, that greater thing in him. So that in that dream there is also a little teaching for Gilgamesh. Don't take all the honor people give you for yourself. Don't lap up the compliments they give you for yourself. It is that star upon you, and that is your heaviest load, your necessity to become a unique individual. That's what they worship in you, not you. And so from then on, Gilgamesh becomes the servant of his unique, heroic task, to the search for immortality.
Very few people follow their own star today. Why?
It is easier to admire a great personality and become a pupil or follower of a guru or a religious prophet or an admirer of a big official personality, a president of the states or give your life for a general whom you admire, that is easier than to follow your own star. Because to follow your own star means isolation, not knowing where to go, having to find out a completely new way for yourself, instead of just going on the trodden path everybody else runs along. And that's why there has always been a tendency in men to rather project the uniqueness and the greatness of their own inner self onto outer personalities and become the servants, devoted servants of outer personalities, admirers and servants and imitators.
What is the nature of the personality that receives that projection?
Generally, if somebody has by birth some outstanding qualities, intelligence or some other talents, and in time he or she attract the projection of the star, and people devote themselves to those gifted people and so on, and in that way then comes the great temptation to develop an inflation. An inflation means an overestimation of oneself. Instead of saying my talent isn't me and I haven't, my intelligence isn't me, I have been born with a good computer and that's all there is to it, there is no merit. People identify with their gifts and they get blown up. Inflation means to be blown up like a balloon, and that you see on a minor scale whenever people have a success. Even if a lecturer has a success and so on, he afterwards displays arrogant mannerisms and or condescendent mannerism. You see that he or she has an inflation, and naturally people who have made history, like the Roman emperors, for instance, to take just a historical example, many of them suffered from what one calls the madness of Caesars.
Inflation, then, is having either too high or too low opinion of oneself. But is it possible to get an accurate evaluation of one's own self-esteem or one's self-worth?
Well, the difficulty is that nobody has by nature a very good estimation of his values. Nobody knows how much or how little he or she is. I mean, ask anybody now, honestly, are you a great person or are you a small person? How small, how great are you compared to others? They would have to admit that they have no idea. It is a subjective feeling. Either one has an inferiority feeling and one feels the last worm on earth, or one has a superiority complex and then one feels one is elected far above the average, one has to achieve something special, and most people switch between those two. In neurotic people it's extreme, and in normal people it's less extreme, but everybody has days where he feels lousy and below the weather and a nobody, and days where one feels on top of the world, so to speak. That is a natural swing back and forth. And one could call a normal personality where the estimation of oneself is approximately reasonable to compare to what one has achieved, who one is, how the surroundings see to one, and so on. But it's a very indefinite thing, really. Any lack of balance in this respect, when it goes either too far below the mark or too far above the mark, has an irritating effect on the surrounding. If one wants to know if one has an inflation, one has to only see if one gets on people's nerves. Then one is probably a bit overestimating oneself. Or underestimating oneself, because that's the same thing. If one has an inferiority complex, it's really ambition. One wants to be more than one is. One wants to be a great person and knows one isn't, and therefore one feels the last worm on earth. That is just a veiled inflation. Inferiority is a veiled inflation, and therefore also gets on people's nerves. when people sometimes come in and say, oh, well, you know, I don't know, I can't do it. How do you think I can do this? You know, I'm not capable, I'm so stupid, I can't think, and so on. And say, now, stop that nonsense. Get on with your job. They are really making a conceited dance in form of calling themselves incapable. So it has, again, this irritating effect. So the only measure one can have, because nobody knows who is important in the last view of life, before God, so to speak, who is important or who is not important. Nobody knows.
I'd like to return to something we talked about earlier. You said that it's easier for an individual to follow in someone else's footsteps than to find their own way. What happens when a person projects their own star out onto somebody else? When they project the self out onto another person?
Let's first see the positive side. If the self is projected, one falls into a tremendous state of admiring the person onto whom one projects the self, a kind of incredible fascination and devotion to that person. And that can have the advantage of being capable of learning. If one projects the self, for instance, onto somebody who is really wise or superior, one can learn a lot. That is even the secret of many miraculous cures, that people project the self onto a healer personality, and in the incredible fascination and faith they have into that healer personality, from that faith they are cured from all sorts of psychological or psychosomatic illnesses. So then it serves as a vehicle of promoting the individual. Much more frequently, however, this fascination leads to infantile giving up oneself and being, so to speak, flat on one's belly before the other person, worshipping the great leader or the great spiritual guru or whatever the projection is, and losing oneself in an infantile way and remaining infantile. Such people are generally very fanatical in the admiration of that admired person, defending that person against the enemies and so on, and basking in the glory of their master or admired person through identification. And that saves these people from making an effort themselves. The great man or the great woman out there is going to do it all for me, and my task is to only applaud and admire the thing. I have to make no effort to become more intelligent or more wise or more independent myself. So it can just annihilate the personality and make them infantile instead of make them grow up and develop them. It naturally depends a bit from the person onto whom the projection of the self falls. If that person has an inflation and misuses it to breed admirers and followers, it has disastrous consequences. But I know also that there are in the Far East sometimes masters who know about the dangers of the infantile dependence and send those novices and pupils back to their own inner task and don't take the projection, so to speak.
The psychology of one individual can be reflected in an entire society. What happens then to the collective if the self is projected?
Well, then you have either monarchies or leader dictatorships. The kings of all countries, down even to the chief of a primitive tribe, are carriers of the symbol of the self. And you have all the advantages and disadvantages of a monarchical system. The advantages are that such a tribe or population has a unifying symbol of the self, which holds them together. That is a projected symbol of the self, and because it's such a deeply rooted need in man to have such a symbol, living symbol of the self. Naturally, for Catholics, the Pope very often represents the symbol of the self as being more of a spiritual leadership than worldly leadership. But that's a split situation in the West. But because there is such a need, you have now, since monarchy has been mostly abolished, we have all the dictators, Napoleon, Hitler. We have always these leader figures which show that people want again or need to project the self onto some leader figure. And that, according to Jung, is an infantile gesture. It's because we want to remain children. We don't want to take the responsibility. Democracy is a very difficult task because it puts the responsibility on everybody. And most people don't want to take political responsibility. They don't want to wreck their brains, but they prefer to think the father state will do it all right. So one likes to project onto a leader. We have a group of leaders, and they are father figures, and they are the self, and they do it all right. Just mental and psychological laziness.
Laziness.
Laziness is, Jung once said, that's the greatest passion of mankind, even greater than power and sex and anything.
In our Western culture, our psyches and our DNA are carrying the symbolism of the Jewish and Christian faiths. In the next two films, we will be looking at the change, the shifting of the symbolism within the culture and in individuals. The foundations of our culture are based on the importance of dreams. In the Old Testament, for example, the priests and prophets, the leaders, believed in their dreams, honored them, and acted on them.
Today we ignore the importance of dreams. We rarely listen to what they're saying. In fact, we've even forgotten their language. Paradoxically, throughout our religious history, dreams played a central role in determining the fate of mankind. They were thought to be the voice of God. Dr. von Franz, let's look first at some biblical dreams. A dream which changed the history of the Jewish nation, the dream of Jacob's ladder. And Jacob dreamed that there was a ladder reaching from the earth up to heaven. And the angels of the Lord were ascending and descending on it. The Lord stood above the ladder and said, "The land on which you lie I will give to you and your descendants. And by your descendants shall all the families of the earth bless themselves. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go." Quite a prediction, eh?
Jacob's dream has been one of the examples which have always been cited by medieval and later authors to justify the taking seriously of dream, and there are some more in the Bible, which were always taken in the Western civilization as proof that God sends dream and that dreams have an important, even they speak of God-sent dreams. They are communications with God. Now Jacob goes to a certain place near Haran, and there, because the sun set, he lies down and he puts a stone as a pillow under his head. And that certain place is mentioned again at the end of the text, that Jacob said, "This is truly the house of God," and so on. This is one of the oldest beliefs of mankind, that in the landscapes there are certain places where one has either communication with the upper deities or with the lower deities. For instance, a dark chasm or a hole in the ground is generally by every primitive tribe looked at as to be the entrance to the underworld, where one communicates with the gods below, where the dead disappear into, or the souls of the children come up, and so on. And then other places, in general, especially mountaintops, are places where there is a special communication with the gods above. If you think of Moses on Sinai, for instance, and so on, because on the mountaintops you are closer, so to speak, to the upper gods. That's why Zeus lives on Mount Olympus in Greece, and all gods live on high mountains, or goddesses. And in a flat country where they have no mountains, it can also be some other special place. Now Jacob didn't know that this place was a sacred place. He concluded it from his dream. He said, that must be a sacred place I have been, because it has come to me. That touches a mystery which we haven't yet solved. Namely, we project our soul into a landscape. There is a whole soul geography in the world. Every nation and every civilization has a geography. They have generally a place where one communicates with the gods above, a place where one communicates with the god below, a place where there are good spirits, a place where there are evil earthly spirits, and so on. It is as if in original man, his unconscious psyche were spread all over the landscape. In certain places in the landscape, you have a shudder and you have certain experiences. The Romans still knew that. They called that the genius loci, the spirit of the place. And when, for instance, they built a house, or they made a garden, then they always put a little statue or phallic symbol up to the spirit of the place. May the spirit of the place be benevolent to me. And if you, with an open heart, still go through a landscape, you will notice that there are places you feel good and you would like to stay, and there are other places you feel somehow uncanny. You don't know why, but you don't want to stay there. You have the same in a house. You see even that your house, domestic animals, have favorite places where they lie and others where they won't go for anything, even if you think they are suitable. One can rationalize it and say it is because there is a cold draft or something like that, but it isn't always. Sometimes one can't find out what the reason is. They just feel psychically good in some places, and we are just the same. We have our favorite corners, and we are angry if somebody else sits there where we want to sit. We are exactly like dogs. But in the landscape, the tribes have the same thing. And so Jacob hit there on a sacred place where his, now talking psychologically, his soul could open to a divine influence through a dream. And he put a stone under his head. And that stone is one, again, of the oldest symbols of mankind, of something sacred. In all most original tribes we still know exist on Earth, and also from all the archaic excavation, and even Neanderthal man and so on probably worshipped stones. Certain stones were felt to contain some sacred powers. And for instance, for the Australian Aborigine, in certain stones the spirit of the ancestor god lives, and if a woman passes those stones, she can conceive a child. The child comes into her womb from those stones. And the same was true. The Germans, old Germans thought that. They thought that the souls of newborn children came out of tombstones on the graves of their ancestors. The ancestors were jumped into the women from there. So the stone is a place of the origin of human life. The sacred is again the eternal man. The stone is something very similar than the star It has to do with the eternal, everlasting substance of the human being. That was projected into the stone. So with this sacred stone, which is a primitive thing under his head, a kind of fetish, which makes him capable of connecting with the beyond, Jacob goes asleep and the sun sets. The setting of the sun could be interpreted as the blotting out of consciousness. He goes deep in the unconscious, he goes asleep. And in that moment he sees a ladder going up to the sky. Now this famous Jacob's ladder, on which angels go up and down, is the motif of a continuous connection with the realm of the gods. For instance, in the shamans and the medicine men of most countries, in their initiation, they climb a tree, or they climb a ladder, or they climb on a rope up into what they say the sky. It's naturally only a few meters what they do in reality, and with the idea of going up into the ghost world and into the world of the gods and having the connection. And for instance, the medicine men in Tibet and China of old were called the master of the cord, because only they had that connection. They could climb up to the sky. And in other places it is a tree or a ladder. It's simply one of the means to go up step by step and have a connection with the divine world. But later, in the Renaissance and in 17th century, Jacob's ladder was interpreted as being the sounds and vowels, or to be the different qualities of the world, or the different numbers of the world. There were all systems which projected into that ladder as being, but the basic idea is a continuous, constant connection with the powers of the unconscious, the divine powers of the unconscious. You could say the dream itself is such a ladder. It connects us with the depth of our psyche, with the unknown depth of our psyche. Every dream is a rung on a ladder, so to speak. And the angels are the messengers of God, so he can receive messages, and there the Lord predicts him the future. That belongs to the historical situation that dreams were mostly attended as means to predict the future or to know the future. And there the Lord predicts Jacob that he and his descendants will spread over the earth and the Lord will be with them. He receives a confirmation that God is with him, and that gives him the courage to go on. And that's why when he wakes up, he calls this place the house of the Lord, Beit El, and puts a stone there as a mark. The stones have always been marker of sacred place. That's an age-old habit of mankind, and goes on from there.
When you use the word God, what do you mean psychologically?
Psychologically, I'm using the words anything which impresses a human being as completely overwhelming, so that the genuine reaction one has is to prostrate oneself to the floor, to venerate it, to fear it. It's what is fascinating, frightening, or positively overwhelming in a sort of blissful rapture. Anything which you can say, what sweeps a human being completely from its feet, that is always been called God.
Are you using the word gods in the same way?
In the same way, yes. Only it means that in polytheistic religions they characterize different ways of being overwhelmed. Overwhelmed by terror, then it is, for instance, Shiva the destroyer, or overwhelmed by bliss, then you are overwhelmed rather by Vishnu or so on. But in all polytheistic religions there are always assurances that really all those many gods are one. And when you have a monotheistic religion, like in Christianity, they are secretly more. For instance, we have Trinity and saints and angels. There's always a secret polytheistic. So monotheism and polytheism always interpenetrate each other. sometimes the accent is more on the one, and sometimes the accent is more on the many who are one.
Are the gods alive and well in suburbia?
The gods are. The gods are nowadays everywhere where one doesn't expect them, and mostly in the desert. They are, for instance, in the bottle of alcohol, or in the LSD, or in some other addiction. Or the Wotan, the god of rage, is, for instance, in terrorists. A terrorist, generally, if you analyze him, is just dedicated to an overwhelming rage. And the rage has him. He has not the rage has him. So that is his God. So we have an innumerable amount of gods, but because we don't venerate them and we don't look at them, they are mostly nasty. That's why, for instance, if somebody has his God in a brandy bottle, you have to find for him a relationship to a spiritual God. You have to drive out the negative spirit by a positive spirit.
In Jacob's dream, angels bring in messages from God. Obviously, people back then believed in angels. But what aspect of the psyche do they represent? Are angels still alive today, or did they all die?
Well, I can tell what happened to me and my friend Miss Hannah. We were driving into town, and suddenly she stepped on the brakes so that I flew into the window, and I was nothing. And at that moment, a child behind the car made itself loose and ran right in front of our car, but we had already stopped. And I said to Miss Hannah, how on earth did you do that? The child wasn't visible when you stopped. It wasn't yet visible at all. And she said, something in me told me, brake at once, brake at once. I don't know what that was. Now, historical man would have said, an angel told me that. My protecting angel told me that. It is sometimes as if a benevolent presence interferes with what we are doing. Miss Hannah had no idea why she braked. She just felt like a voice in her ear saying, brake, brake, and she braked. Now, people sometimes fall down from a roof and get caught up by a tree branch, or they have a bad car accident where theoretically they should be dead and they are practically unhurt. And that makes them feel that there was some intentional, meaningful agency at work which helped them or saved their lives, a presence. And that it is not just a mechanism, because thing does it intelligently. That's why one feels it's like a personality helping one, something personal, something protecting or personal. We have also naturally evil angels, which can lead us down the road of destruction. But generally, the idea of angels comes from such experience, miraculous experiences, where one feels that some intelligent agency beyond us has helped us. Now, one feels a present. The angel has also sometimes to do with the idea of a double. Most primitive people in primitive civilizations believe that we have somewhere living in the bush, or also invisibly accompanying us behind us, a greater personality, an invisible double. Now, we would say that's a personification of the unconscious, of the maker of dreams. And if one sees that double actually in reality outside, then it is generally a symptom of death, primitives say, because they think that we are, as long as we live on earth, split. We have a consciousness, a restricted consciousness, which is the thing we would now call our ego consciousness, and we have a greater personality, invisible personality, which lives behind us or somewhere in the bush, and which so only appears at certain moments. And if a primitive is saved in such a miraculous way from an accident, he would think that his double has done it. So the double and the angel protecting angel have a lot to do with each other. It's always the same experience that something more intelligent and greater than your ego is alive in you, and sometimes makes you do things or arranges your fate against your own will and against your own planning. And that is an experience I think everybody has had in his life sometimes. And naturally in higher religions that was then transformed into the teaching that there are angels and that everybody has a good angel protecting him, and sometimes also an evil angel trying to seduce him or her. It is the battle of powers, half personified powers in the unconscious within us, for which we are not responsible, and which were understood as messengers with God. The angels have the function. Primitive man thought that God has not the possibility of looking after everything himself, so the angels are his delegates who look after his creatures.
Many medieval paintings often show angels as messengers of dreams. They show the dreamer and then the angel bringing the dream down from heaven.
Yes, the dream was very often understood as being, so to speak, the angel was understood as being the personified essence of a dream, because you see, dreams also save our lives. Sometimes we have a warning dream, and if we attend to it, we can avoid all sorts of disaster. I, for instance, would never take a flight if I had a disastrous dream the night before, because I think if the unconscious takes the trouble to give me a warning dream, I should attend to it. Our unconscious, and we cannot explain that, but it is a fact that it does know more than we know. That it is as if the unconscious of the human being is expanded into outer nature and has informations which we cannot have. And therefore in dreams you get sometimes warnings or informations about things you cannot possibly know.
In Jacob's dream, an inner authority gives him direction for the rest of his life. We talked earlier about how that inner authority can be projected out onto an individual or a great personality. Can it also be projected onto a cause or an ideology?
Yes, you can either project on a personality of a spiritual or worldly leader, or it can be an ideology, an ism, or a religious conviction, which you also then look at to be the highest goal and dictating important factor of your life. That is just as possible. That's why wherever you have fanatical beliefs, be it in religion or an ideological system, you have this projected outer star, so to speak, which you follow.
Can you give us some examples of leaders on whom people have projected their star?
Hitler was a malefic star, so to speak, to whom thousands of Germans followed. And Christ was a beneficent star whom millions followed. There are naturally false prophets and good leaders, bad leaders, and even that history decides, and if one looks closer, even the good leaders have some drawbacks, and it is not so clear, but you have the same when somebody elects a guru or has a too great transference to his psychotherapist or so on. It's always having projected the star, the uniqueness of the personality onto the other, and being fascinated by the person out there instead of following it within.
And how would that apply to movie stars?
Just in that sense. For instance, a feminine movie star, you see how all the teenagers of the world try to dress in the same way and style their hair in the same way. It is the star, it is the ideal, the feminine personality they would like to become, or therefore they even try to imitate. And the same with male movie stars. That while generally movie stars also start the whole clothes fashion and so on, everybody imitates them. It is, so to speak, the ideal man or the ideal woman they represent. And as the ideal changes every 5-10 years, there are always new stars with a new style, which then appeal to a new generation or to other people. Or to be a model personality, so to speak, for everybody.
Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's neither a good thing nor a bad thing. It depends on what one does with it. For instance, you can say that if the British hadn't, in those hard times during the last World War, projected their star on Churchill and had complete belief and courage, which gave them courage, they would have probably not stood through the ordeal. So Churchill, being the star of the British nation in a dark time, saved the British nation. So in that case, it had a beneficent effect.
Dreams have determined the destiny of individuals, but they've also altered the fate of entire cultures. Let's look at 3 dreams which determine the destiny of our civilization. Dr. von Franz, first of these I'd like to look at is the dream of a young man who lived in the desert almost 3,000 years ago. He was his father's favorite child, and his father gave him a coat of many colors. He had 11 brothers who were intensely jealous of him. And one day, he told his brothers this dream. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose and stood upright. And your sheaves gathered round it and bowed down to my sheaf. And then I dreamed that the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Would you show us how this dream reveals Joseph's destiny?
Joseph was a bit naive to tell his family his dreams, because though they probably didn't interpret them consciously, they were hit by them and got angry. Namely, the first dream says that the sheaves of wheat bow before him. Now, the sheaves of wheat have been in those times a simile of the generations of human life. There is, for instance, a whole symbolism in Egypt, and you have allusions to it also in the Bible, that man is like wheat. He blossoms, he is cut by death, and from the roots he sprouts again. So the cycle of life and death and eternal returning to eternal life has been always projected into the wheat. You have that also in the Greek Eleusinian mysteries. You have it in the biblical saying that if the corn doesn't fall onto the earth, it doesn't bear fruit, and so on. So there is the idea. So if he dreams that the sheaves of wheat bow before him, it would mean that the whole earthly life, the vegetation and the earthly life, and with it the human beings, the tribes of human beings, would bow before him. It is a dream which shows his inner election to become a leader, a leading, outstanding personality. And naturally, some people further remote might fall for that and admire him and follow him and imitate him in the sense we mentioned before. But the family generally hates a family member to be a genius or to be outstanding or different. Sometimes you have families who have a genius child and they identify with it and run the show with it and kind of bask in its glory. But more frequently, if we read the histories of gifted people, outstanding people have generally trouble with their family member. Jealousy and wanting to bang them down into shape, and misunderstanding of their outstanding fate. It has also to be said that outstanding personality generally is pay in some way for their outstandingness. They have also generally some unpleasant characteristics to compensate their greatness, and therefore they are difficult to swallow for the surrounding. And Joseph naively tells his dream, and the reaction becomes quite clear. And then he has even a worse dream, namely that sun and moon and the stars bow before him as if he were the new sun, the new center of the sky. So this is again a very exaggerate formulation of his outstandingness, of him being the man elected by the Lord. From a modern standpoint, one must conclude that Joseph was not knowing about his importance, that he was rather underestimating himself. If one has such a dream, if he needed such a dream, it shows that he probably thought himself consciously as a very ordinary person. And that's why the dream hammers into him, no, you are something special, you have a special destiny, and the sheaves of wheat and the luminaries in heaven will bow before you. You are the center, you are the important person, on you everything will depend one day. That also prepares him to later take responsibility for his tribe, for the Jewish tribe. Without such dreams, nobody can take the responsibilities of a leader. But with such a dream, one can take the responsibility. One knows one has to stand there and have the courage to take the responsibility.
In your practice as an analyst, have you ever seen a dream like Joseph's which revealed a person's destiny?
Oh, yes. I had, for instance, in my practice, a painter who painted, he was his training was, but also his predilection was, that he painted very accurately outer things and therefore earned his living mostly by very accurate old-fashioned portrait painting. Not modern portraits like Chagall or Clay or so on, but old-fashioned photographic-like paintings. And that was his passion, and he had a violent resistance to what he called modern art and its destructive and impossible ways he despised. And night after night he dreamt that he had to change completely and paint inner things and abstract things. And for instance, he used always dark colors. He had clear dreams which said he had to paint in bright colors. And he had a very disagreeable physical symptom. Among other, he was impotent, and as soon as he began to obey the dreams, his physical symptoms and his impotence disappeared. He was cured by having to change completely his artistic style. Now, that was not a vocation where he had to change profession. He had only within his profession to change completely his way. But you have other people. I have had people where they had to change profession. They had to become writers, or they had to give up everything and do something else instead. That's naturally always a terrible moment of fear and crisis, but what we call a vocation, a call, to have a call to do something, that occurs very often. And quite frequently the neurosis of people comes from the fact that they don't have listened to their call.
Joseph later became quite a dream interpreter. Here's the dream of the Pharaoh, which he interpreted. Pharaoh dreamed he was standing by the Nile, and behold, 7 cows, sleek and fat, came up out of the river and fed in the reed grass. And 7 other cows, gaunt and thin, came up out of the Nile and ate up the 7 fat cows. Joseph's interpretation saved Egypt from a fate of starvation. Can you explain how he made that interpretation?
If we want to understand Joseph's interpretation, we have to a bit follow up the thoughts of that time. Now, the cow in Egypt was a mother goddess, And for instance, they thought that a heavenly cow covered the whole heaven. A cow was standing over the sky and supported by the god of air, Shu, and on her belly were all the constellations of the star. When you looked up, you really look at the belly of an enormous cow. And the Isis, the great feminine goddess Isis, was also sometimes represented with a cow head, and so was the goddess Hathor. And so the cow had to do with the cosmic maternal principle, with the principle of feminine fertility of the earth and the sky naturally giving the rain in those dry countries. The milk is the rain is the milk of the heavenly cow and guarantees all life. And the number 7, according to the thoughts of those times, was always associated with the 7 planets and with the 7 metals and so on, and meant a complete cycle. After 7, with 8 it re-begins. That has also to do with a week. We have 7 days, and the 8th day is a re-beginning. So it is associated with 7 is in the tradition of number symbolism is associated with the symbolism of a complete cycle of time. So Joseph thought along those lines and thought there will be a complete cycle of time of fertility where the mother goddesses will give plenty, and then a cycle where there will be poverty, and so he predicted to the Pharaoh that there would be 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of hunger and drought would come, which fulfilled itself completely. That was the way he thought or he interpreted the dream.
You know, the amazing thing about that is that the Pharaoh acted on the interpretation. The President of the United States suddenly said, we're going to build big storage bins and put all the grain of the West into them for the next 7 years. We're going to have a famine. And he said that that's based on a dream I had last night. The whole economy is going to change because of a dream I had last night. He'd be put in a loony bin. If the Pharaoh came to you with that dream, would you have given that interpretation?
Yes, if I knew I have an old Egyptian pharaoh before me in my practice, I would talk in that language.
The third dream of destiny is a dream which we all know, but perhaps don't realize is a dream. It's a dream of a carpenter who was engaged to a young woman whom he believed was a virgin. And when he found out she was pregnant, he had this dream. Behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, do not fear to take Mary for your wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, and he will save his people from their sins.
Though in the time of Joseph, that was a time people were still inclined to, more than they are today, to believe in supernatural facts. Obviously, Joseph too had his very common and ordinary suspicions against the pregnancy of his wife. And he needed this dream of God to tell him that the supernatural divine birth of Christ had taken place. In all religions, the central teaching contains such paradoxes, namely generally something which is right against human experience. It is, so to speak, the essence of a religious saying that it says something impossible. And this asserts the superiority of the spirit over matter. In the materialistic world, there is not such a thing as a virgin birth. But by asserting it is so, the religious saying asserts the priority of certain inner spiritual things above outer material things. That's the meaning, and that's why it's wrong to want to do away with it. And you find the same thing in dreams. Whenever people are too rational and materialistic, then the dreams point out something completely supernatural. I remember the dream of a woman who dreamt that she saw on the floor a little mechanical animal made of diamonds, but which was alive and walked around. And she consulted Jung about it, and he said, that is to prove to you that the impossible is possible. That you are still too rational, you think such a thing cannot happen. You are not open to miracles. And there are miracles, there are in the realm of the psychic realities, miracles can happen. And that the dreams assert generally by asserting the impossible. And say, look, you think that's impossible, and just that does exist in the realm of the psyche. It doesn't exist in the realm of matter, but it does exist in the realm of the psyche. And Joseph also needed the angel, a messenger from God, to, in a dream, tell him that Christ was born in a supernatural way, conceived by the Holy Ghost, which is how most heroes, mythological heroes and heroes in different religions are born. The virgin birth is not something unique for Christ, but most supernatural savior figures are born in such a way, or conceived in such a way. And Joseph, according to the spirit of the time, took that completely literally and accepted it, and stood up for the Virgin Mary and accompanied her and protected the child and carried all the difficulties for her without ever wavering in his faith, because naturally one can imagine that the people in his surrounding talked quite differently about these events. So it shows again how here the dream unites certain people into a common action. And that was the dream life is a community promoting factor. If people attend their dream, some people always think if one attends one's dream, one becomes a solitary, lunatic, funny kind of autistic person who follows his own dream in an asocial way. But that is not true. Very often dreams order us to relate to somebody or something which doesn't occur to us at all in consciousness. And so the dreams create social bonds and new social behavior, just as much as they sever sometimes old social ties. But this dream is not at all an asocial phenomenon. And that you see here, that Joseph, who might have turned against his wife and been destructive to her, through the help of a dream, completely changes his attitude and supports her throughout her whole life.
You've written about other cultures in which the dream plays an important social role. Can you tell us about those?
Many so-called primitive tribes, I don't like the word primitive, but let's say people who still live in a natural surrounding and have their own natural culture intact from white influence, those people rely very much on their dream. There's this famous tribe of the Sonhos who educate their children to relate their dreams from early age on, and every dream is discussed in the family and the tribe and interpreted, and one can say that practically their whole social life and behavior is oriented towards and based on their dreams and their way they interpret dreams. Or for instance, there's an Australian origin tribe who have a festival, Kunapipi, which lasts 30 years, a whole generation. Every year part of the festival is performed. And at the end of each part of the festival, they assemble the tribe and they ask who had dreams about the ceremony. And then they discuss the dreams, and if there are propositions in the dreams to change the ritual, they change the ritual. so that the ritual always corresponds to their inner dream life, or that their inner dream life always has a say about their religious ritual.
In Canada, the Iroquois Indian tribes took their dream seriously. In fact, one of the massacres of the Jesuits was a result of a dream.
They also, some of their prophets foresaw the disaster of their community in dreams, and they tried to defend themselves as well as they could, and they also told the white missionaries who tried to destroy their faith as superstition, they told them their dreams and to prove the reality of their spiritual experience. So I think the writer of this thesis says that one should now study many more primitive societies, and one will probably discover that this is true for most primitive societies. But up till now, ethnologists haven't asked about it, and then they didn't tell about it much. I mean, one has to go for these themes before finding out. But it looks, from all we can know now, that most primitive cultures and societies heavily rely on dreams. Also in China, they always had, I just read a paper the other day that still in the streets, even now in communist China, there are specialists to whom you can go and have your dream interpreted. There are different, they are kind of medicine men, sometimes a bit charlatans, and sometimes very serious people, who interpret the dreams to people in the street. They go up there and they pay something for having their dream interpreted. And from the interpretations I have read, they sound most modern. Those men, Chinamen, are very good psychologists, and they have intuitions about the dreams of people which would completely correspond to what we would say.
What can modern psychology learn from the way in which primitives relate to their dreams?
That in general primitives are less technologically and rationally oriented, and therefore have a more natural outlook on life and on death and on their own inner life. They are better related to their instinctual life, as long as they are not disturbed by our technological civilization. And therefore we have the urgent need to return to a similar way of life. They can show us by their more natural and more wholesome reactions what we have lost. We have to become too lopsidedly intellectual, and therefore that's why we don't relate anymore to our dreams, or we think in waking up our dreams are silly dreams or absurd dreams or nonsense. That's our first impression. While the primitive man who has more symbolic thinking, and generally also through his tribal traditions, he has more mythological and symbolic knowledge. He has a better relationship to his dreams, and that means he has a better relationship to his inner life, to his instinctual life.
Is that part of the role of the psychoanalyst in modern society, to reconnect the individual with their instinctual inner life?
That's why in Jungian therapy, the offer for the patient is that he can establish a unique relationship, and that one offers him a unique relationship, which is not a technique of therapy or a certain way of approaching or looking at the other, but a personal encounter. And that's why Jung said, forget all psychological theories when you meet the patient. Just meet him with your heart and your mind as a unique human being. And then it doesn't become boring. Every encounter is an adventure.
And what role does the dream play in this?
The dream does that. Among the over 60,000 dreams I've interpreted, I've never met two same dreams. The dream is always unique and comes always uniquely at the right moment, at a certain moment. And that's the message of the powers of the instinct, of the powers of the collective unconscious, the message which comes that night through at that moment, and is a message which is meant for you. The dream is a message which is, the alchemists would say, is a message from the unique to the unique. Namely from the divine center of the psyche to the unique individual one is, and to the unique situation one is in. And that's why you can never predict dreams. You can never go to bed and say, I'll probably dream about this and that. It never comes off. You will always dream about something completely different. So at the source of the dream there is a creative mystery which we cannot rationally explain. It's the creativity of nature. It's the same creativity which has created the million of species of animals and flowers and plants on the earth, which man could never invent. And the dreams are also like flowers or plants. They are something unique you can only marvel at.